Hello, I'm Elizabeth Wydra, President of the Constitutional Accountability Center, and welcome to today's Purple Chair Chat. We call these conversations Purple Chair Chats because normally we would be coming to you from the iconic purple wing chairs of CAC's Washington, D.C. offices. But we, like so many of you, have been working from home during the COVID-19 pandemic and making do. We know that so many have lost so much and struggled so much during these difficult times, and I sincerely hope that you are staying safe and well and trying to keep hopeful. Purple Chair Chats tackle the important legal, political, constitutional moments of the day, and today is a very special edition because we are marking Constitution Day 2021. September 17th is a federally designated holiday as Constitution Day and Citizenship Day, commemorating the signing of the U.S. Constitution in Philadelphia on September 17th, 1787, and to celebrate those who have become U.S. citizens and are taking steps to become citizens. So we at CAC love Constitution Day. The Constitution is, what we do every day. It's kind of our jam. But there are definitely, and unfortunately, reasons for somber reflection as we mark Constitution and Citizenship Day this year. We just saw the Supreme Court disregard the Constitution's guarantees of liberty that protect reproductive choice, which are so integral to women and other people who need to access abortion having equal citizenship status, crucial to their being able to determine their own destinies and to step onto the public square as true, meaningful equals in society. We also think of the promise of equal protection of the law, written into the Constitution, but routinely denied in the streets by racist policing practices that are insulated from justice by terrible judge-made doctrines like qualified immunity. Parts of the Constitution seem in tatters today. But there are some bright spots. Despite ugly and relentless attacks on the constitutional promise of equal citizenship at birth, the principle of birthright citizenship remains a bulwark against racist manipulation of who gets to be an American citizen. And despite persistent scare tactics and attempts at marginalization, democratic participation of diverse communities is growing, with the political power of Black, Latinx, and Asian American communities in particular increasing. Joining me to talk about all of this and more is Nina Perales, acclaimed civil rights lawyer and vice president of litigation for MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund. Nina has won crucial victories in the Supreme Court on voting rights and redistricting, and is a key movement leader in the fight for civil rights and voting rights. Thank you so much, Nina, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Elizabeth. It's such a pleasure.
So I just wanted to open by asking you generally, what your thoughts are as we go into Constitution Day and Citizenship Day.
Well, thanks. I love Constitution Day, Citizenship Day. I spend a lot of time thinking about citizenship in my work, both the rights of Latino citizens as well as non-U.S. citizens. And it's always a pleasure to dip into the Constitution and look at what it says about citizenship. The U.S. Constitution talks about citizenship, and it recognizes that we are a nation of immigrants. When it was written, for example, if you look at things like eligibility to serve in federal office, you see that you have to be a citizen for 7 years to serve in the House and 9 years to serve in the Senate. And also that, the president has to be a natural-born citizen of the United States. And then, of course, we have even juicier the amendments and the wonderful critical provision in the 14th Amendment of birthright citizenship, meaning that if you're born in the United States, you're a citizen of the United States. And it's really crucial to a lot of the work that we do here at MALDEF. And there are also lots of references later on in the amendments to the rights of various different folks to vote. So, for example, the right to vote without any kind of burdens based on race in the 15th Amendment, the right to vote for women in the 19th Amendment, the poll tax in the 24th getting rid of the poll tax in the 24th, and then finally anybody over the age of 18 being able to vote in the 26th Amendment. And so the Constitution has a lot to say about citizenship and the rights of citizens. In the past few years, though, we've really seen an attack on the idea of citizenship, particularly in the Latino community, and also the voting rights of US citizens. So, for example, in 2019, in the summer, we had President Trump sort of publicly toying with the idea of ending birthright citizenship and connecting that very directly to Latino immigration to the United States from the South. I'm talking about people walking across the border and saying that the children of people who come from the South should not be US citizens. And we also had other initiatives that may have seemed less explicit, but were really attempts to undermine the political power of Latinos and Asian Americans, for example, by attempting to put a citizenship question on the US Census. And then when that was thwarted, really shifting to the idea of subtracting political power from communities and areas that had a higher number of non-US citizens, and subtracting the political power not just of non-US citizens, but of the citizens who live in and around non-US citizens, which are predominantly Latino and Asian American. And these ideas are really playing on ideas that have been around much longer, but which got more widespread, I think, and more explicit during the past several years. These ideas that people of color perhaps are not quite as much US citizens as white people are, right? So some examples would be saying that Barack Obama was not a US citizen and that he was not born in the United States. This attack, I think, was tied very much to the fact that he was Black. And also attacks on the idea that if you are Latino, that you're not really as much of a citizen as others. And we saw this in a case that we had to bring in 2019 in Texas, where the Secretary of State launched a voter purge of 100,000 registered voters in Texas. Based purely, he selected them for the voter purge on the fact that they had previously held a green card and had a driver's license. It's very legal and very typical to have both a green card, to be a lawful permanent resident, and to have a driver's license. Those two things go together. Then you become a naturalized citizen and you register to vote and you proudly participate in elections. What the Secretary of State did was target 100,000 naturalized citizens on the basis of their previously having a driver's license, and then saying that they were not US citizens and they needed to be taken off the rolls. Luckily, our lawsuit was successful and a federal court stopped that effort. But now we have a newly enacted voter suppression law in Texas that takes direct aim again at naturalized citizens by severely curtailing the right of naturalized citizens to bring somebody with them to help them cast their ballot at the polls. So the new voter suppression law cuts back on the rights to voter assistance in the polling place. These types of efforts are connected to kind of narratives about the idea that Latinos, Asian Americans, African Americans are not legitimate voters, are not US citizens. People who claim voter fraud when they hear, for example, somebody speaking Spanish in the polling place or asking for language assistance in the polling place. And even, the increased rate of just Latinos walking down the street and having somebody scream at them, "Go back to Mexico," right? Which is another way of sort of emphasizing this idea that this person, because they are Latino, is not a citizen of the United States or not from the United States.
Thank you for that discussion of, both the kind of the way the principle is embedded in the document and then the way that it plays out and is challenged all the time on the ground. And I think you get to a really important point that this is, a struggle over defining what it means to be an American. And, part of what I find inspiring about the birthright citizenship protections in the Constitution, making clear that no matter whether your ancestors came over on the Mayflower, whether they were forced on a slave ship, whether they came, with nothing but what they could carry with them over the border as refugees seeking asylum. If you are born here, you are an equal. You are equally as American as everybody else. And that is a somewhat radical principle that is written into our Constitution, unquestionably. But because it does have that radical equality element to it, is constantly being challenged by those who want to limit for reasons of political power or just straight up racism, who can be part of that American family. And I think it's interesting the way that ties directly to political power. And that's, a lot of what you're talking about when you work on these voting rights issues. What are we seeing right now? What are the tactics that are being undertaken in states like Texas, where you just testified about redistricting and other types of voter suppression and intimidation?
Well, it is certainly true that the face of the American electorate is changing. The 2020 census, as difficult as it was to carry out because of the pandemic, because of threats around citizenship, we still saw the census reporting that there are 62 million Latinos in the United States, right? And the rate of US citizenship for Latinos is close to 80%. And so this is a direct challenge to those who don't want to see the electorate change. And so the types of measures that we see are largely intended from state to state to freeze the electorate in place. And that sometimes means even preventing white folks from registering to vote, as long as the kind of current electorate is stuck in place. So for example, in Arizona, back in the mid-2000s, Arizona adopted a law that said you had to provide documentary citizenship to vote. And that meant, a birth certificate or some other kind of document on file. And this prevented a lot of people from registering to vote in Arizona in the mid-2000s. The largest numerical group was white folks because they are the majority of folks in Arizona. But it also had a disparate impact on Latinos being able to register to vote. And we litigated that case, took it to the Supreme Court, and won a victory that at least allows people to use the federal voter registration form and its processes to register to vote in federal elections in Arizona. But it was very much about making sure that new young Latinos did not get on the voter rolls. And I also gave an example before about Texas trying to cast 100,000 registered voters off the voter rolls, specifically because they were naturalized US citizens, because the only people who met that criteria were naturalized US citizens. In Texas, it's about half Latino, half Asian American. And so the types of measures that we see make voting or voter registration more difficult. And I believe just primarily to prevent the electorate from evolving into a younger, more diverse group of voters.
That's how democracy works. It ebbs and flows, and you can see entrenched power not wanting to give that power to a younger, more diverse electorate. We've been talking a lot about voting rights, which obviously are protected in the Constitution, and citizenship protected in the Constitution. But one of the other things that has come up recently relates to the Constitution's requirement that you have a census every 10 years. And this is in the Constitution, and it is an important part of, when we're talking about who gets to be an American, it's an important part of declaring who is part of we the people, that both constitutes and is represented by the government. And that includes voters. We've been talking about the importance of their power, as well as non-voters. Mm-hmm. And so the count of who the people are is an incredibly important part of American democratic society. But we did, again, during the Trump years in particular, see an attack on the constitutional process of taking a census, particularly aimed at trying to intimidate immigrant communities. And it was a hard-fought battle, but eventually we won on the law. But I think the concern, and you can tell me, is that, some of that intimidation, just simply by having a question about whether you're a citizen or not, maybe did some of the work for them, for those who wanted to suppress the political power and representation of communities. Can you talk a little bit about that, Nina?
Yes, definitely. When the Trump administration announced that it was going to add a citizenship question to the US Census, it had a really big intimidating effect on the Latino community. And the administration knew this because in some of the trial runs that they were doing for the census, the census takers were reporting that when they touched on questions of citizenship and immigration, there was one census taker who wrote an account back and said that the man that they were interviewing in his own home got up and walked out of his own home and left the census taker behind, sitting in the living room, because that individual did not want to talk about questions of citizenship and immigration status as part of giving information in the census. And so, yes, even though there was successful litigation, that meant that the administration couldn't put a citizenship question on the census. There had been so much coverage and so much talk about it and the effects that it would have on people that there was quite a bit of hesitancy to participate in the census. And then on top of that, we had the pandemic. And as a result, it was very difficult for the census to do what's called non-response follow-up, which is to go to people's homes, knock on their doors, and ask them, hey, we see that you haven't responded yet to the census. Can you please just give us that information? We'll stand outside your door. There were a lot of people who wouldn't open the door. And then also the Trump administration truncated non-response follow-up, claiming that everyone had been counted. And we know that there's an undercount. Where I am right now, where I live, is in Texas, and we're seeing the predominantly Latino border county census data coming in, and it's much lower than what we know to be reality on the ground in terms of Latino population. So it has, I think it was a 1-2 punch. The citizenship question, and then also the pandemic made it incredibly difficult to count Latinos in this census.
And can you say more about what that means? Because, it's not just we want a head count for the sake of having a head count. The census is incredibly important for a lot of reasons. And, I think the census sounds so dry and boring that sometimes we don't understand the way in which it is actually crucial. And so it's completely understandable that many people did not want to open the door to someone during a pandemic when they're worried about immigration. And certainly they had every reason to fear the Trump immigration authorities with some of their enforcement techniques. But can you talk about why the census is important and what role it plays in kind of our government and our democracy?
Yes. To do that, I have to quote my favorite political scientist, Cardi B. She said that the census was about 3 things: money, power, and respect. And
that is exactly right.
I mean, nobody could have said it better. And this was part of an effort, of course, to speak to the Latino community and to other communities to encourage census participation. But it is everything about money, power, and respect. So money, because census data is used to distribute federal funds and other funds as well to communities. If you are undercounted in the census, you're going to get less dollars to your community for everything from food programs, education, infrastructure, you name it. A lot of these formulas are based on census data. And power would be the next thing, and that has to do with political power. We apportioned the 435 seats of the U.S. House of Representatives to the states based on their state population and the whole number of persons, not just people of a certain age or people of a certain citizenship status. We count everybody, and we distribute federal representation in the House of Representatives based on the whole number of persons. And when you are undercounted as a state, you're going to get fewer congressional seats and you will have less of a voice in Washington, D.C. And then, finally, respect. When you have numbers, you are able to claim more attention for policy-making purposes.
That's absolutely right. Thank you so much for laying that out so clearly. We're running out of time, but I just wanted to, thank you for talking about the growing and current state of our diverse democracy. I think on Constitution Day, especially because we're marking the day in 1787, which I understand, but I do think it kind of reinforces this idea that when many people think of the Constitution, they think of these bewigged white guys in Independence Hall in Philadelphia. And, the fact is that our Constitution has grown. It's followed an arc of progress that was written by many of us who were excluded from We the People at the time of the founding, and have made our Constitution better by passing amendments that provide equal protection, passing the 14th Amendment enshrining birthright citizenship, passing the voting rights amendments that time and time again have made our democracy more inclusive. And so I wish that image would be one that we celebrate on Constitution Day. And I'd just love to close by giving you an opportunity to say, what things you find hopeful or worth celebrating on Constitution and Citizenship Day.
It's very much the same as what you described. What I find hopeful is that even as our country changes in its demographics, the Constitution is expansive enough and flexible enough to be able to take in, all of these folks, and to respect the rights of, people of color who weren't originally included, of women, of people who don't own property. Poor people have the same rights under the Constitution as anybody else. And I love it. I love that aspect of the document, that it's able to keep up with our changing times.
I wholeheartedly agree. Thank you so much, Nina, for joining us today. I really loved our conversation, and I'm so grateful whenever I get to work with you and your colleagues at MALDEF, and thank you for your work. It is much needed. And I know that I speak for everyone across the country when I say thank you. Keep fighting the good fight. Thank you for everyone joining us. You can find out more about CAC and all the work we do on citizenship and voting rights and other issues at theusconstitution.org. You can find us on Twitter at MyConstitution, and you can find me at Elizabeth Wydra on Twitter. Thank you and be well.